Did you kill her?
No, absolutely not. That's crazy.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you guys are new here, my name is Crystal and welcome to my channel. Thank you guys so much for clicking on this video. If you guys are new here, then welcome to my true crime series. I call it True Crime Wednesday or Crime with Crystal. And if you guys are tuning in on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, then welcome back to another true crime video. If you guys are not already subscribed, then please go ahead and subscribe. Also, do not forget to turn on your post notifications so that you guys are notified the moment I upload a video. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into today's case. So today's case is about a 31-year-old mother of two whose name is Elizabeth Sullivan. She went missing in 2014 from San Diego, California. Immediately after she was reported missing, the police suspected foul play. Elizabeth's close friends knew that something strange and out of the ordinary must have happened. Some people, in fact, thought that perhaps Elizabeth went missing on purpose and her intentions were to never be found at all. So this is the story of the strange disappearance and murder of mother of two, Elizabeth Sullivan. Elizabeth was described by close ones to be charismatic, funny, and very intelligent. She was super smart and creative. She was born and raised in Virginia, but once she met her husband, Matthew, who was actually in the Navy, she relocated to Liberty Station in San Diego, California. So Elizabeth and Matthew met in Virginia, but because of Matthew's job, being that he was in the Navy, he was stationed and relocated from Virginia to San Diego. So this is what ultimately caused Elizabeth to uproot from her hometown in Virginia and moved to San Diego to be with her husband. So there in San Diego, Elizabeth and Matthew lived in a multi-level townhome. I believe it was 3 stories high. And there Elizabeth lived with her husband, Matthew Sullivan, and her 2 daughters, ages 2 and 4 at the time of Elizabeth's disappearance. Being that Elizabeth was not from San Diego, she was from Virginia. When she did go to San Diego, she kind of made herself feel super comfortable. She started to make friends, she started to go out with people, and started to really grow comfortable in being in San Diego. With Matthew being gone for long periods of the time, being that he was in the Navy, this made Elizabeth even want to, just dive into the community even more. She became super social. She had lots of friends in the community. Like I said, she just became a social butterfly. And San Diego was indeed the place to do this. If you guys have not been to San Diego is such a beautiful town. You're near the beach and there's just so many things you can do around there. So I could just imagine the community of friends that Elizabeth built in San Diego. Being that she was from Virginia, I know that this was like a super different scenery. So I'm sure she was loving it, going to the beach, like I said, hanging out with friends, things of that nature. So on October 14th, the San Diego Police Department had announced that Elizabeth was actually missing. So this part gets a tad bit murky because some sources state that Elizabeth's really close friend who lived in San Diego as well, his name was Nathan. A lot of people state that Nathan was the one to first call 911 because he hadn't heard from Elizabeth. Like I said, this part is a little unknown. I'm not sure if him and Elizabeth talked on a daily basis, and then once they didn't talk, he just kind of knew something must have been wrong, or if he just kind of just have that feeling. Some people just know. So maybe he was waiting on Elizabeth's call or text. She never called or texted, which is why he reached out to 911 and reported her missing. Nonetheless, Nathan did reach out to 911 and report Elizabeth missing on October 14th. In addition to that, which I said again is a little bit confusing, but in addition to Nathan's call, Elizabeth's husband Matthew also called 911 the morning that Elizabeth disappeared. Here is Matthew's 911 call.
I have concerns. My wife is trying to have me, I don't know, evicted or arrested from my house and take my children away from me.
And what's her name?
It's Elizabeth Sullivan.
Do you know when she's going to be returning home also?
I have no idea. She leaves for hours, sometimes days at a time.
Elizabeth was last seen the day prior, which was October 13th. She was last seen by her husband, Matthew, who was back in town from work. Once the police department began asking some questions, they noted that Elizabeth's car was still in the garage of the family's multi-level home. Matthew also pointed out to police that it looked like one of the family's suitcases was missing as well. Once they started to dig a bit more, investigators also found out that the day prior to Elizabeth going missing, she had transferred $1,000 from their shared marital account into Elizabeth's own account, which obviously led investigators to believe that Elizabeth chose to go missing on her own. There's a family suitcase missing, and she transferred $1,000 from their shared marital banking account into her own account. Typically, when people do this, they are planning to go away, which is what investigators thought. They thought that she decided to leave on her own free will. Investigators then found Elizabeth's journals, and after reading them for a while, they soon realized that the stories in Elizabeth's journals were actually super similar to her own life. They read a part in the journal that she wrote when a woman in her story abandoned her family and started a new one. So this led officers to believe even more so that Elizabeth had left on her own will. When investigators collected Elizabeth's phone data, they saw that the day prior to her going missing on October 13th, Elizabeth sent a text message, and this was believed to be the last known contact to any of her friends or family. And strangely enough, a couple of days later, Elizabeth's phone was turned off. This really stuck out to me because Elizabeth sent her last text message on October 13th, but then didn't turn her phone off until a few days later. So if her phone was on between October 13th and the following days, what was she doing if she wasn't communicating with anybody? But I think I'm jumping a little bit ahead of myself. So let me finish telling you guys a story and then you guys let me know your thoughts. I always try to keep like my comments and my thoughts to the end. It's so hard for me not to interject in the middle of the stories because like I said, I just have so many opinions while I'm researching and, telling you guys these stories. So I'll hold them to the end. So investigators had also learned that from time to time, Elizabeth had been a bit emotionally unstable, which is why her disappearance didn't seem alarming to her husband, Matthew. So to help out Elizabeth a bit while Matthew was deployed for his long periods of times, Matthew actually purchased plane tickets for his mom and his mom's husband to come to the family home and stay with them for a bit, kind of basically move in to help Elizabeth out with the kids and the home. Like I said, he thought that she started to get a bit emotionally or mentally unstable, so he thought that he was helping out by doing this. But in fact, this actually made Elizabeth super angry because she did not get along with Matthew's mother. So when Matthew told Elizabeth, hey, my mom and her husband are coming into town, they're going to stay with you for a while, Elizabeth was not having this. She said, no, not at all. Cancel that ticket. Your mother is not staying here. Her husband is not staying here. They will just make me even more upset. So Elizabeth kind of basically shut all that down. So while being questioned by authorities, Matthew also explained that a few days prior to her disappearance, Elizabeth was so mad at Matthew because they had gotten into an argument yet again that Elizabeth didn't return that night. Some sources state that Elizabeth actually stayed at a homeless shelter that night instead of going home. This, of course, was another reason to Matthew as to prove why he wasn't surprised that Elizabeth had walked away again because she had done it before. Seeming as though that this was like starting to become a part of Elizabeth's character, and Matthew was making sure that the officers knew, hey, this is a part of Elizabeth's character. We get into arguments, we get mad at each other, she leaves, doesn't come back till the next day or a few days later. But this time Elizabeth hadn't come back home, and Matthew was assuming that she was gone for good, and he was ultimately trying to convince officers, I think she's gone for good this time. So after investigators now started to speak to, Elizabeth's friends and her family members, people outside of Matthew, investigators learned that she and Matthew had been living separate lives for a really long time. So basically, while Matthew was deployed, Elizabeth had kind of adapted to becoming a single mom. She was raising the kids on her own. She was doing all of the housework on her own. She basically was a single mom. So when Matthew did come back home from deployment, he sort of had a difficult time integrating back into their life, trying to play that husband role and that father role. And it was also hard on Elizabeth too, because she was used to doing everything by herself. She wasn't used to having help around the house. She wasn't used to, going to sleep with her husband every night. And I know some people may say like, oh my gosh, like I would love if, my husband's away at work and he came back. But you honestly never know what's going on in someone else's home. So again, this is information that is coming from the friends and family of Elizabeth. They also told authorities that there had been accusations of domestic abuse going on in Matthew and Elizabeth's home. They stated that the police had been called to their home on multiple occasions. And unfortunately, due to these stressors, they stated that Elizabeth has started over-medicating herself. And she also began to develop a personal, intimate relationship with the man that she met on Tinder, basically stating that Elizabeth had a boyfriend. So a few days after Elizabeth's disappearance on October 19th, there was a sighting of her at a park by two off-duty deputies. These deputies stated that they spoke with Elizabeth and she seemed as if she was under the influence of something. They also stated while talking to Elizabeth, she told the officers that she had lost her phone and asked them to help her locate her phone. A few days later, there was another sighting of Elizabeth, and at this time it was near the San Diego International Airport. But the sighting of her at the airport turned out to be a false reporting. So here we are a month later in November of 2014, there still had been no sightings and no evidence of Elizabeth. Oddly enough, well, I guess to some people this was odd, to some people it wasn't, but about a month after Elizabeth's disappearance, Matthew was back on the dating scene. He was going on dates with people. He started courting other women. And a couple of months later, Matthew actually got a girlfriend and moved his girlfriend into the home that he once shared with Elizabeth. Sure what you guys think, but to me, this is still odd, being the fact that Elizabeth's body still was not found and they have two young children, the ages of 2 and 4. So to me, it just kind of seemed like he gave up hope a bit, a little too soon. But here I am again, interjecting my opinion too soon. I'll hold it to the end. So here we are, 10 months after Elizabeth's disappearance. There's still no sign of her. It was as if she just disappeared into thin air. And unfortunately, by this time, Elizabeth's case had gone cold. So on October 4th, 2016, almost 2 years after Elizabeth disappeared, a woman's body was found near a body of water in Liberty Station, San Diego. This body was later confirmed to be the body of 31-year-old Elizabeth Sullivan. After an autopsy was done, it was shown that Elizabeth's cause of death was multiple stab wounds to her body. And now this case was officially handed over to the San Diego Police Department's homicide unit to begin their investigation into Elizabeth's murder now that they officially had a body. Okay, so get this. On the day that Elizabeth's body was found, Matthew, his new girlfriend, and his 2 children were actually moving. Yeah, the day Elizabeth's body was found, Matthew was moving. The authorities went to go inform him that they found the body of his wife and they discovered that he was moving. And surprisingly to authorities, this did not stop Matthew from moving. Authorities found it a bit weird that Matthew was not fazed by this discovery of his wife and that he was just going to continue to pack up and move his things out of state. He was moving to the state of Delaware, in fact. So it wasn't like he was moving towns or moving around the corner. No, he was picking up his stuff and moving to an entirely different state. So after authorities and now the homicide unit start to dig into Elizabeth's disappearance, they reopen her case and start to backtrack, they found out something interesting. So if you guys remember, I said that the day before Elizabeth disappeared, she transferred $1,000 from her marital banking account with Matthew into a bank account on her own. Authorities found out that she never touched that $1,000. That $1,000 was never spent on anything. Strange, right? So authorities are now assuming that Elizabeth had been killed before she even got a chance to use her money. They also discovered that based on the level of decomposition of Elizabeth's body when it was found, they stated that Elizabeth hadn't been deceased for 2 years, more so 2 months, because her body hadn't gone through the full stages of rigor mortis and decomposition. So this is throwing officers off even more. Officers waited until Matthew officially moved out of his marital home that he shared with Elizabeth, and they performed another search of the home. This time, they don't need Matthew's permission since he doesn't live there anymore. So authorities search his home for more clues, and this time they believe that they know exactly what they're going in for. They're looking for a murder weapon, being that Elizabeth was stabbed. They're really looking for the knife. So police go up into the attic and they pulled insulation from the attic, uncovering a military-style folding knife containing blood DNA from Elizabeth. They also found Matthew's DNA on the handle of the knife. And authorities have now found their smoking gun. They have Elizabeth's body and they believe now they have the murder weapon. So on January 13th, 2018, Matthew was officially charged with the murder of Elizabeth Sullivan. He was arrested outside of his new home in Delaware and extradited back to San Diego, California. So here's where the state had some difficulty trying to prove that Matthew, in fact, killed Elizabeth the night that she went missing on October 13th. Like I said, when they found the body, her body rigor mortis hadn't set in for 2 years. Her body was only at the state of decomposure the body typically is for 2 months, not 2 years. Authorities then brought cadaver dogs to their family home, and the dogs alerted to a freezer that was empty. It was like one of those large, like extra freezers that people typically like keep in their garage to store like extra food and stuff. So when they brought the cadaver dogs in there, the dog immediately alerted to the freezer. The freezer was empty, but officers believed that the freezer is where Elizabeth's body had been kept for 2 years, which would explain why her body was only at the level of a 2-month decomposed body and not a 2-year decomposed body. While looking back at photos of when authorities first searched the couple's home years prior, they saw the same standalone freezer plugged in, but this time the freezer was in the garage next to Elizabeth's car. And when they opened the freezer at that time, the freezer had been empty, assuming that Matthew hadn't placed Elizabeth's body in it yet. But authorities believe that this is where Matthew did keep Elizabeth's body for 2 years, like I said. Fast forward to 2016, now Matthew plans on moving to the state of Delaware. Authorities believed that he dumped Elizabeth's body near that body of water because he could not take the freezer with him on his move to Delaware. But thankfully, authorities figured that out very quickly. So in February of 2020, Matthew's trial began. Matthew's defense attorneys argued that there was no real evidence that Elizabeth's body had been held in that freezer. They also stated that Elizabeth had a past of unpredictable behavior. They stated that she abused drugs and that she had another relationship outside of her marriage. So no one was surprised that this was the defense case because this is pretty typical of them to basically point out everything Elizabeth had done wrong. So now let's rewind a bit. Earlier I stated there had been 2 sightings of Elizabeth. One was at a soccer park and the other was at the San Diego airport. So the sighting of Elizabeth at the airport had already been found to be not Elizabeth. So now, since trial is around, they go and ask those 2 off-duty authorities, hey, we're going to need your statements again. You know, we're charging this guy for Elizabeth's murder, XYZ. So when they start to interrogate the 2 off-duty officers, so they stated that they didn't believe that they saw Elizabeth after she had been reported missing. They stated that they could have got their dates wrong, and they actually believed that they saw Elizabeth a few days prior to her going missing. They still stated that they believed it was her. They helped her look for her phone. She seemed disheveled. So while piecing this together, people believed that Elizabeth probably seemed disheveled and all over the place because this was the morning after she had spent the night in the homeless shelter when she didn't return home when her and Matthew had gotten into an argument. So that sighting now it's still important because, you know, they did see her a few days prior to her disappearance. So it can kind of speak of what she looked like in her state of mind. But like I said, this sighting wasn't after Elizabeth was reported missing. So I just wanted to clear that up for you guys too. So those were the 2 reportings that she was so-called seen. Now that it's actually not proved that Elizabeth was seen after she was reported missing, this gives authorities even more belief that she was killed that night on October 13th in the family home. Then Elizabeth's boyfriend was called in to testify. He stated that he received messages from an unknown email address from someone claiming to be Elizabeth. And as a test, he asked them to identify what was on the keychain of a hot tub key when they had spent time together. The person on the other side of the emails responded to him with the correct answer, which was a fact that only Elizabeth herself would have known. But unfortunately, Elizabeth's boyfriend had deleted all of these messages before printing them out or even showing authorities. So there technically isn't any physical proof that this email exchange did happen. But like I said, the boyfriend was called into court to testify in regards to these messages. Prosecutors further believed that Elizabeth's affair and her plans to leave Matthew were a motive for her murder. Elizabeth's friends were also called to testify in court. Her best friend stated that Matthew knew about Elizabeth's affair and he knew that Elizabeth was going to file for divorce. She was in fact on her phone with Elizabeth the night prior to her being reported missing. This best friend was from Virginia. So this was Elizabeth's longtime best friend from her hometown, whom I'm sure Elizabeth trusted with all her heart. So that night when Elizabeth called her best friend, she was telling her how scared she was, and she was telling her that she didn't know what to do. So her best friend suggested, hey, just get a glass of wine, go into either your bedroom or the girl's bedroom, just lock the door, and this will all be over in the morning. If you're still feeling uneasy, if you're still feeling anxious, if you're still feeling scared of him by morning, then I think you should go to the police station and file a police report against him. And while they were actually on the phone, Elizabeth's best friend was like, okay, where are you? Are you in the bedroom? And she's like, yes, I'm in the bedroom. She locked the door. And then she heard Elizabeth say, oh, wait, hold on, or I'm going to call you back, or something along the lines of that. And her best friend testified in court that that was actually the last time she had ever spoken to Elizabeth. So being that now authorities had an idea of what room Elizabeth may have been in when Matthew murdered her, authorities go into that room and spray luminol everywhere, and sure enough, it lights up like crazy. They even pull up the carpet and test the blood that's found underneath the carpet, and that blood matched to Elizabeth. So Matthew chose a jury trial instead of a bench trial, which just means he chose the jury to decide his fate instead of a judge. So now it was up for the jury members to debate a few things. One, they had to debate based on the evidence whether or not Matthew in fact killed Elizabeth or not. And two, they had to debate whether or not this murder should be classified as first-degree murder or second-degree murder. So the jury came back and found Matthew not guilty of first-degree murder, but guilty of second-degree murder. At Matthew's sentencing, his defense attorneys pleaded and argued for leniency on Matthew. His attorneys asked the judge to take into consideration the fact that Matthew had served 8 years in the U.S. Navy, and they started naming all of these awards and accolades that Matthew got while he was in the military. To me, that was just their last probably cry for help. I mean, Matthew has literally murdered his wife. So ultimately, the judge sentenced Matthew 16 years to life for the murder of his wife, Elizabeth Sullivan. So I'm not sure if good time was taken into consideration, but in August of 2028, Matthew will actually be eligible for parole, which is not too far from where we are now. We're in 2024 right now. So that means in 4 years, Matthew can be eligible for parole, which is crazy to me to think that he will even possibly someday see the light of day. I really do hope that Matthew, when he does apply for parole in 2028, I hope that that parole is denied, and every single time he applies for parole thereafter. I, in fact, do agree with the statement that Elizabeth's family made in court, which was that they do not believe Matthew should ever experience freedom ever again in his life.
For years, San Diegans were trying to answer the question, what happened to Elizabeth Sullivan, a Navy wife and mother of two who vanished back in 2014. Years later, her body was discovered and her husband was convicted for murder.
But there's much more to the story that will be shared tonight in an all-new episode of Dateline. You'll hear from Sullivan's family and her killer, and also learn about new evidence from the case, including the 911 calls from her husband the day she was reported missing. Mark Mullen has a preview.
I have concerns. My wife is trying to have me, I don't know, evicted or arrested from my house and take my children away from me.
And what's her name?
It's Elizabeth Sullivan.
This was the first time San Diego police heard the name Elizabeth Sullivan. It was October 14, 2014. Dateline obtained these 911 calls, placed the date she went missing, by her husband, U.S. Navy service member Matthew Sullivan.
Do you know when she's going to be returning home also?
I have no idea. She leaves for hours, sometimes days at a time.
It's your birthday cake. We're going to sing happy birthday to you.
What followed was a nationwide search for the missing mother of two. But sadly, weeks turned to months, which turned into years, which yielded no answers. Still, Elizabeth's family stayed hopeful and vigilant that one day there would be a break in the case.
I feel like she's in trouble.
Then, nearly 2 years to the day since she went missing, a horrific discovery. Sullivan's body was actually found floating in the San Diego Bay. Police would eventually arrest Sullivan's husband, Matthew, for her death, a relief for Elizabeth's family and friends.
Justice is being served, but, it doesn't bring her back.
Last year, Sullivan went on trial for the murder of his wife. A jury found him guilty of second-degree murder, and a judge sentenced him to 16 years to life in prison. Now, a year after his sentence to prison...
Did you kill her?
No, absolutely not. That's crazy. I've never laid a finger on her. I've never hit her. Nothing like that.
Matthew Sullivan is sitting down with Dateline as the team goes over the case of a mother's life taken too soon.
And you had constant fights, and finally you just lost it and killed her with a knife. That's clearly what the law believes.
No, I see what you're saying, Keith. I'm just saying I was trying to do the right thing.
So this is the unfortunate and tragic case of Elizabeth Sullivan. Now kind of looking back at the case, I'm wondering where Matthew could have possibly hid Elizabeth's body prior to him putting it in the freezer, knowing that he had an addict and authorities maybe didn't know about the addict at the time or know to check for the addict. I'm wondering if Matthew could have hid Elizabeth's body in the attic, and then once authorities were done searching his house, they put her in the freezer. Another thing was super strange to me was that Matthew's new girlfriend, his mother, and his mother's husband were all living in this house, walking past this freezer every day. The freezer was no longer in the garage when the authorities went in the house and saw it. The freezer was now plugged up in the hallway, which means each family member could have been walking by this freezer every single day. It means that her kids could have possibly been walking by their own mother deceased in a freezer. Just thinking about it literally just gives me chills, honestly. So let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. I would love to know your thoughts and your opinions on this case. You guys think that his mom and father-in-law and girlfriend knew that he had murdered Elizabeth and knew that her deceased body was in the house for almost 2 years? Do you think that they should have been charged as well for maybe accomplice act after the fact or helping Matthew hide Elizabeth's body? Do you guys think that Matthew deserved a longer sentence than 16 years? Because I sure as heck do. But like I said, that's pretty much my opinion. I know that I was kind of telling it pretty much throughout this story just because I feel so strongly and I can't hide my opinion. But I think what happened to Elizabeth was so sad and unfortunate. I think that it's even more sad that she was struggling with her mental health. I think that if you are struggling with your mental health, I think that you definitely should reach out or seek help or guidance in some way. But yeah, that's going to be it for today. Let's keep the conversation going down below in the comments. Do you think that Elizabeth got justice, or do you guys think that justice was served in this case? So thank you guys all for clicking on another true crime video. Thank you for coming back to Crime with Crystal. If you are listening on Apple and Spotify, thank you guys for tuning in as well. Please do not forget to subscribe if you have not already subscribed. Also, don't forget to turn on your post notifications so that you guys are notified when I upload a video and you don't have to go digging on my page for it every Wednesday. So until next Wednesday's true crime video, I hope you all stay safe out there.